I developed one habit very early in my career that has drastically helped me accelerate my career in construction and has helped me build the confidence that I needed to eventually start running several $100 million of my own work and also estimate over $10 billion worth of work in the middle of New York City. It probably doesn't get any more harder than that as a seasoned senior estimator. So what's that habit? Early on in my career, every time we started a new operation, I tracked all of my productions and all the different criteria, which I'm about to explain, that has allowed me every couple of years fall back on that information when we restarted a new operation that was similar to that, to understand exactly what I needed to get going with the operation, what was going to go right, and maybe what was going to go wrong in that operation, what kind of conversations I had to have weeks in advance, and also what I needed to be prepared for. So what I did was, 21 years ago, I started this binder. Field Productions, Equipment and Material Requirements, and Estimating Info. So what's inside of each and every one of these pieces of paper that I've gathered and that I've created over the past 21 years? So let's get going. In the beginning, it's simple. Every operation that you start, you should document that operation. And we're going to talk about all the different things that you need to document very shortly. It's a simple sheet, piece of paper, handwriting, or in today's day and age, you can type it up. I have a lot of handwritten stuff because back when I started, I was lucky to even have a computer my first couple of years. I think it took about 5 years for me to get my first computer. But anyways, I documented everything by hand and then transferred everything into a Word document. So what's it consist of? Every time you start an operation, on the top, it's the date, right? You need to know when that happened because the costs, your unit costs, are going to be reflective of that date. So if you look at this 5 years from now, you're going to know how much to accelerate to kind of give you a ballpark. So date, what project it was, a full description of the work that you were doing. What was the weather, especially if you're working outdoors. Then what you do is this, you create, what was the labor crew? If it was productive work, which this works best with productive work, take an average of 3 days. So take your labor crew for the average of 3 days, write down all the materials that you used, write down all the equipment that you used, especially if you're a civil contractor. I have a very large civil background, so equipment is a major cost for us. What was done, also, what was crews, materials, and equipment that was required, that was done off-site before you started that operation, and what was done off-site after you were done with that operation, which is part of the operation, which are off-site operations that complete that on-site operation. A lot of people forget about this, and this is a major reason why a lot of change orders, people feel that they're losing money on change orders is because they're not capturing off-site costs to make that on-site operation actually happen. Now, again, what I said before is take an average of 3 days, take the average and put a cost to it. Come up with a unit cost. If what you're doing is concrete, for example, right? You're going to want to track per cubic yard. If you're tracking the forming of concrete, which is a completely different operation, you want to come up with a square foot price. If you're installing something that is a linear foot unit, come up with a linear foot unit price based on the current day. That's why it's important to document the date. Next, attach any photos, plans, specs, submittals. Maybe if it was engineered work, any calculations that all corresponded with that specific operation. You got to be well documented with this. Next, describe the logistics, the egress. Give full details. Why did that crew only work 6 hours that day instead of the 7.5 hours that day? You know, another important thing also is that if nobody works 8 hours unless you're putting in overtime, right? It naturally takes time to get equipment and materials to the job site. Or the crew might start on the bottom of a building or the bottom of a bridge and needs to get bussed or needs to take an elevator to get to the floor that they're working on. So naturally, crews are not working a full 8 hours. But for this particular cost, to come up with a unit cost, you have to factor in 8 hours. And whatever the productions are, the productions are. But what happened in that shift that created more momentum and created less momentum? Notice how you're just documenting everything possible. What went well and what went wrong. Did a piece of equipment break down that destroyed the productions? That, when you're estimating, you need to keep that stuff into consideration, right? Nobody's working a perfect 8-hour shift. Nobody's working a perfect 7-hour shift. Stuff happens on job sites, and this is why it's important to document what went wrong and what went well. What to look out for the next time. By now, if you're a couple of years into the business, you'll probably know how each specific project is a little bit different, right? So what can you add to this outline that's going to help you 5 years down the line understand what to look out for the next time? This is great for planning ahead of time as well, right? So what considerations to make? What kind of different equipment can you possibly try the next time? What different means and methods should you consider for the next time? You should always be looking to get better, right? If your productions were 100 linear foot a shift, what can you do to make it 120 linear foot a shift by using that same crew? So just keep documenting everything that you possibly can come up with. Now, if you're in your first couple of years, this is a little bit more difficult. But as you move on, you'll be able to add more and more to each of these outlines. Also document, and this is what I document also, was what kind of conversations were made. What were the owner's rep, or if you were a subcontractor, the GC concerns that you had on a pre-construction meeting before you started this operation? Jot down everything that you came up with. What were the problems? What were the solutions? This is a great way to tackle objections on your next project. So you know well and ahead of time when hopefully you're putting together your 2-week and your 4-week and your 6-week look-ahead schedules or your CPM schedule. So you could have these conversations well in advance before you start before you start your operation. Now, luckily for me, I also spent many years in estimating. I estimated over $10 billion worth of work. This binder has been critical to my estimating, because I had backup to explain why the concrete's costing $2,500 a cubic yard, which included everything, the rebar and the forming and all. But it's also important to document and to break out each scope of work for a particular operation, right? So if your operation has, if you're going to break down your estimate with different activities to come up with your total cost, your total unit cost, you need to break out. Like for example, in the beginning of this video, I talked about concrete, right? Installing rebar is one operation. Pouring the concrete is another operation. Forming and stripping is another operation. You don't want to lump all those together. Unless you're, see, I come from a union world. So for me, each of those is a different trade. So it's a different operation. Unless you can possibly lump it in together, if maybe you're a residential foundation contractor and that one crew of 4, 5, 6 guys or gals is actually going to be doing all the forming, the rebar lumping, the rebar installation, and the pouring, then it becomes a little bit more of a different operation, right? You know, maybe you could possibly track everything together, but I would still break it out as much as possible. So again, this is one habit that I developed very early on in my career and has drastically helped me accelerate my career. It helps you build the confidence that you need to keep moving up that corporate ladder. I hate to say that, it gives me chills, but because I hate bureaucracy and I hate the corporate atmosphere, but it's required to move up. And I hope this video helped. I would love to know your thoughts.